My name is David Pratt. I've been teaching for 32 years. I teach in art. I have about 10 different courses that I teach over a year. I also teach computer-aided drafting. That includes architecture and mechanical. And I also have computer graphics classes that I teach as well. I would say that for today, one of the primary goals was to get students into an environment where they could interact with other professionals, adults, and be able to show the skills that they have, and at the end of that day feel confident about what skills they possess. And there are also a lot of layered issues in there as far as goals worked into that. For example, students actually working with a mentor and getting along with that mentor in a democratic format, and also being able to banter back and forth and have that give and take across that generation gap, and those generation gaps were there, and to actually come out at the end with a good feeling about how the conversations went, the activities. I used various kinds of assessments. I don't have just one. I would say that they're as varied as the assignments that I teach, and they're constantly changing. I never leave an assessment alone. I tweak it, I alter it in whatever way is necessary. And I actually find that I like doing that. I like designing and changing those assessments because I'm always thinking of better ways to assess. In the third trimester of the school year, we call that CAD 3, I usually have a unit devoted to architecture. And over the past 2 years, that unit has migrated to CAD 1 in order to get students excited about drafting and CAD and technology. It seems that there's sort of an innate interest by students in architecture. It's almost across the board, and it's a hook. And so I'm going to take advantage of whatever I can to get those students excited. And that's why another instructor and I moved that back to the first trimester. And the interesting thing about it is that's, let's say, an idea generator, which leads them on to many other potential concepts that they might work with. But in the third trimester, we now are substituting more or less the collaboration issues. I always try to bring in things that are closer to home, that are real-world situations. The collaboration is a real-world situation. It's not down at NASA or even on the web, and it's in their own backyard. And I think if you can make connections between what's in your own backyard and the real world, that's a level of understanding that will never be forgotten. We did have some preliminary trials with the K'NEX toys. We met on Fridays over a 2-week period for one class period, and I had them assign a recorder in the group, gave them a 3x5 card, and the only thing I asked them to do was to brainstorm, to think about what things might be done when we come down here to meet in the collaboration to challenge the mentors. And so they just played with the toys to become familiar with them, realizing that the more important goal was to brainstorm and to give them some practice at brainstorming in preparation for this event. And out of that, they came up with all of the ideas that we actually ran with in this reenacted activity. And the other things that we did were basically spontaneous. In the presentations that the students gave, they used images that they had taken with a digital camera from downtown here, including the Carnegie Building and the Savings Bank. And we took those back to school, and we really didn't know at that point that what we were going to do was going to work. And so we inserted those digital images into the program and then brought them into the AutoCAD Architecture 2 is where we first started. And once we had that in there, then we just experimented and found out that we could actually draw over the top of the images And one of the nice things about it was that we were actually able to zoom those images so we could get in real close. And one of the problems that we had right up front, we discussed, was like on this building with the trim around it, you can't see the detail. And so by zooming in, you're able to see that detail. But we also learned that we're going to have to take better digital pictures in order to see those details as well. So it's a matter of training on both ends ourselves to make sure that, you know, these things work as well as possible. When you have worked with students for a while, you know that standing up and lecturing is not a way to teach students. Now, I know I have colleagues that will argue that point until their last breath, but in my opinion, you have to be very varied in the way that you teach, and that means knowing many different ways of teaching. And teachers over the years are taught many different ways. You know, there are so many different types and kinds and philosophies and ways to teach. And for me, the best concept is pick out the best of what works with you and work with it until it's working right, and then you know, the students are going to let you know if it's working correctly. I mean, if they're not responding, you know it isn't working. And so it's always easy to say, well, yes, you can learn a lot from a lecture, but from my experience, the more varied that I can make my presentations, the more I can get the student into an interactive learning situation, the better the learning quality is going to be. And interactive learning is basically putting the instructor into the position of a facilitator. And to me, being a facilitator is more effective than being, in terms of, maybe it's an old term, an instructor. Again, that was one of the strongest suits today, I think, was the fact that we had their power sharing, we had opinion, information flow, decision making, something kind of ambiguous called meaning making, and actually that was taking place as students were showing some of their work. Tolerance, I noticed in some groups that the mentor would be kind of domineering the conversation and the student was very tolerant. And normally this is unusual for a teenager, and a lot of that took place today. Of course, these are a good bunch of kids, but they're definitely critical thinkers also, which is part of this. And that was evident by all of the discussions they had, for example, doing the Kennex toy building set concept. There was really a lot of in-depth discussion there about some complex subjects, and they were doing quite well explaining to each other there are two different worlds, and being able to meet in the middle and create this object. So there was a lot happening there from a democracy standpoint.